Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar. It is Tuesday, September the 8th, 2020. In this edition of the Politicrat, the economy, the Latinx community, and a surprise segment of sorts. Welcome back. Before I even get started, did you watch the NBA last night? The NBA playoffs, this second round, it's quite great to watch, I think. Some of these games, and I don't watch the NBA as much as I used to, but these NBA playoffs have been quite a revelation. Yesterday we had a terrific game. It was the game between the Los Angeles Clippers and the Denver Nuggets. Very exciting game all the way through. Back and forth, great efficiency, great shooting, and the fourth quarter was an absolute gem. And the LA Clippers came from behind on several different occasions in this game. Down at least 10 points on two different occasions, even three, I think. And then they finally put on a clinic of defense when they absolutely had to win the game 113-107 to take a 2-1 series lead. Game number 4 of that series is tomorrow. I definitely recommend that you watch. What a game that was last night. I think that was the best game of these playoffs. And I've not watched many of them, but maybe 2 games I've watched, 3. So that's not a big sample size. But my goodness me, that was an exciting, thrilling playoff game in the NBA, which you can't say very often for the NBA playoffs. Usually they aren't that great. It's only when you get to the Western and Eastern Conference Finals and into the NBA Finals that things really start to get going, and usually are pretty good for the most part. But that was a great Game 3 last night between the LA Clippers and the Denver Nuggets. Okay, enough of the sports. Let's get to 1 or 2 or even 3 subjects, actually. Certainly the economy is where I'm going to start today. And my question to you is, are you better off now than you were in July? Are you better off now than you were in July? We are now exactly 8 weeks from the end of election season, and that's what I'm going to call it. We have exactly 56 days left in election season. And I say that because the election has already begun. Voting has already begun. Last Friday, North Carolina became the first state to mail out its absentee ballots. Over 643,000 ballots have been requested. And that's a significant thing. It really is. Very soon, if the mail holds up, North Carolinians will be receiving those ballots, and they will, I hope, fill them out immediately and return them immediately, which is what you should do when you get your ballot. Of course, I have long suggested that you demand your ballot. Call up your Secretary of State or your state board of elections, your local board of elections, your county board of elections, I should say, and ask them if you can pick one up, if you can pick up a ballot in person. Be proactive. But the point of me saying this about North Carolina is that the election season is underway. And rather than saying there are 56 days until November 3rd, the better thing and the more accurate thing to say is that there are 56 days left of voting, because that is the truth. People are beginning to vote now. When they get these ballots this week from North Carolina, they will start voting. So this is voting season. This is the election season for you to vote. And I recommend strongly that you vote early. Please vote early. As I have said on this podcast in several episodes, the key is voter turnout early. And as I said last week in an episode, if you vote early, and obviously in droves, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be in the White House come January 20th, 2021. So that's really the incentive here, to get the two of them into the White House and make sure that Donald Trump becomes a footnote in history, relegated to the ash heap of history. Throw him on the ash heap of history, because he has destroyed this country. There is no question about it. I don't care who you support, who your candidate was in the primary. I don't care if you voted for this guy in 2016 or not. You can clearly see that not only is he quite frankly destroying the country, he's not even interested in winning. He's interested in destroying. That's all he's ever done. Rick Wilson, who is a former Republican strategist, has written a book about this, as I've said before. Everything Donald Trump touches dies. And he has touched this country, not in a good way. He has destroyed this country. And if you want 4 more years of that destruction, then you know what to do. If you want 4 more years of stress and anxiety and wondering what this clown is going to do next, if you want more of that, then you vote accordingly. If you want 4 more years of lying and 20,000 additional lies to the 20-some-odd thousand he's already told, then you know what to do. If you want a White House and an America in 2021 that respects people, that respects people's humanity, that actually cares about people, that will revive jobs and try to stimulate the economy and get people back to work and bring some level of semblance of sanity back to the country and restore it to some kind of decency on the world stage. And if you want people who believe in science and who believe in having better coronavirus testing and more opportunities and better economies and better ways of life and better stimulating of the American spirit and the confidence of people and people who listen, then you vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. It's that simple, really. But I return to that question that I began with. Are you better off now than you were in July? And I say that because I asked that question pretty simply. Paul Krugman of the New York Times, he is an economist, Nobel Prize-winning economist, and he writes in the New York Times, has done for several years now, for a number of years now, opinion columnist at the Times. His column yesterday, the 7th of September, entitled Gross Domestic Misery is Rising. And he makes some of the points that I've made over the last goodness knows how many episodes about the economy. So I'm going to be reading, I guess, quite a bit of this column. And he starts it with that question, are you better off now than you were in July? On the face of it, that shouldn't even be a question, he says. After all, stocks are up. The economy added more than 1 million jobs in August. I'll explain the scare quotes in a minute. Preliminary estimates suggest that GDP is growing rapidly in the third quarter, which ends this month. But the stock market isn't the economy. More than half of all stocks are owned by 1% of Americans, while the bottom half of the population owns only 0.7% of the market. Jobs and GDP, by contrast, sort of are the economy, but they aren't the economy's point. What some economists and many politicians often forget is that let me try this again. Jobs and GDP, by contrast, sort of are the economy, but they aren't the economy's point. What some economists and many politicians often forget is that economics isn't fundamentally about data. It's about people. I like data as much as, or probably more than, the next guy. But an economy's success should be judged not by impersonal statistics, but by whether people's lives are getting better. And the simple fact is that over the past few weeks, the lives of many Americans have gotten much worse. But things have already gotten worse for millions of families that lost most of their normal income as a result of the pandemic and still haven't gotten it back. For the first few months of the pandemic depression, many of these Americans were getting by thanks to emergency federal aid, but much of that aid was cut off at the end of July, and despite job gains, we're in the midst of a huge increase in national misery. In any case, that August report wasn't great considering the context. In normal times, a gain of 1.4 million jobs would be impressive, even if some of those jobs were a temporary blip associated with the census. But we're still more than 11 million jobs down from where we were in February. And the situation remains dire for the hardest hit workers. The pandemic slump disproportionately hit workers in the leisure and hospitality sector. Think restaurants. And employment in that sector is still down around 25%. While the unemployment rate for workers in the industry is still over 20%. More than 4 times what it was a year ago. So the economy is still bypassing those who need a recovery most. Yet most of the safety net that temporarily sustained the economic victims of the coronavirus has been torn down. The bottom line here is that before you cite economic statistics, you want to think about what they mean for people and their lives. The data aren't meaningless. 1 million jobs gained is better than 1 million jobs lost, and growing GDP is better than shrinking GDP. But there is often a disconnect between the headline numbers and the reality of American life, and that is especially true right now. The fact is that this economy just isn't working for many Americans who are facing hard times that, thanks to political decisions by Trump and his allies, are just getting harder. That was Paul Krugman, Krugman, and he is on Twitter at Paul Krugm as in Mike A-N. Nobel Prize winner in economic sciences. So he is an economist. And he's written a lot of articles and posts in the New York Times and in the opinion pages for years now. It's been close to 20 years. I remember reading him back in the 2000s, 2004, 2005. So one thing and I just read parts of that story, I skipped about a bit in that op-ed, but one of the things that I say all the time that Paul Krugman echoes here is quite simple, is that the stock market is not the economy. It really is not the economy. People have to understand that. The economy deals with, as I said, things like housing buys, things like housing construction. And when I come back from the break, you're going to hear Chris Hayes from MSNBC from last night mentioning that the housing prices have gone up, or at least in this visual, which you won't be able to see, there is an article that briefly flashes on the screen that shows that house buys have actually gone up. I don't remember there being, though, anything about houses being constructed going up. But the point is that Paul Krugman in this story, this op-ed says, like I've always said to you, that the stock market is not the economy. The stock market deals with investors. And investors are these big money buyers. As he points out, I just mentioned, more than half of all stocks are owned by only 1% of Americans. And what Paul Krugman does not say, but what I will say, is that those 1% of Americans are not people who are in the bottom 90%. Those 1% of Americans are literally the top 5 to 10% of this country's wage earners and wealth growers, because really, that's who it is. It's the super rich. It's the wealthy. It's people making in the high six figures or into the 7 or 8 figures. It's the CEOs. It's the money movers. It's the people who are on Wall Street buying, 10,000 shares of this and 50,000 shares of that, moving markets. It's all a private casino. That's what the stock market is. The Dow Jones Index I've talked about, the Standard & Poor's, the S&P 500, that's the 500 companies. It's about their own wages and rather their own shares and their stock. It's a club of 30 Dow Jones companies and a club of the 500 from the Standard & Poor's Index, the S&P 500. They have no relationship to you as an average person who's working or who's been laid off because of this pandemic. So I think it's very important that we put this stuff in perspective. And all Donald Trump does is like to conflate, deliberately so, the strength of the stock market, which is the strength of the stock market for the top 1% of the country, the super rich, and these corporations and CEOs, with the entire economy. You can't conflate those two things. Do not be fooled by this. The economy consists of the bottom 90% of people in this country. The people who work, the people who buy, consumer confidence, the people who can go to a movie theater and watch a movie. Movie theaters are only slowly opening in some places. And they're only opening at 25% capacity, Hoboken, New Jersey, and some other places. The economy is only as good as the consumers who contribute to it, as the workers who earn a wage and use the money they earn to put money into the economy to stimulate it. The stock market has nothing to do with that. The stock market is a private club for the richest in the country to move money and move markets. I worked in that industry, I know. Worked in it for a few years. So I know a whole lot. Years ago, I worked in the stock industry, buying and selling and working at this company that did that, monitoring trading. And come on, this is something I know a little bit about. My question remains, are you better off now than you were in July?
Six million Americans have contracted the coronavirus. It's now swelling in parts of the Midwest, and there are outbreaks popping up on college campuses across the country, some looking really bad. And then you have kids and parents and teachers who are trying to make learning from home work with schools shut down. Then you've got other folks in schools where it may not be safe. The Trump campaign strategy in the face of all this is just basically pretend it doesn't exist. It's like COVID doesn't count, Trump 2020. They're going to run on the economy as if it didn't crash in the last 5 months. In fact, the president was out today to brag about jobs numbers, conveniently leaving out that any gains don't even return the country to where it was 4 years ago. You see how that works? Like when you subtract and then you add, but what you add is less than what you subtract. Down 30 million. He's celebrating the gaining of back of 10. Oh, we've gained 11 million jobs. Great. Now we're just 20 million under. But while there is some polling and anecdotal evidence to suggest that Trump has got stable approval ratings in the economy, what's actually happening with the economy is really, I think, two different stories. And this is a familiar theme in recent American economic history. So one of those stories actually looks pretty good, in some ways surprisingly good, right? The stock market hitting record highs, but not just the stock market. New home sales hit 14-year highs. If you go to a car dealership these days and try to get a car, the cars are on back order. They can't sell them fast enough. But when you zoom in, you see a bifurcation with a certain set of people that are recovering very quickly. And that particularly pertains to people at the top, Trump's rich buddies who already got their tax cut, and the ones who own $300,000 boats that they can take out in the Trump boat parade, the ones whose stock portfolios are going through the roof that Trump is constantly bragging about. And then there's the other folks, a lot more of them, 24 million unemployed, and a growing long-term recession that's sort of obscured by all the economic data, but it's hardening and it's festering and it's deepening. You got food scarcity and evictions and long-term layoffs that continue to mount and huge, enormous budget cuts that are coming to every state and municipality in the entire country absent a federal rescue. And that part, that's the real economic story of what is happening under Donald Trump's watch. In some ways, that is the story of this election year as much as anything else. The irony, of course, the Trump administration has rejected the opportunity to make that better themselves.
So why would you be voting for Donald Trump unless you earn about $500,000 a year and above? Your taxes have gone down. And in fact, if you're earning more than that and you're at $1 million plus a year or more, your taxes have gone down. You've seen tax cuts. And if you're in the top 1 or 2% in the country, you've not paid any tax at all. Jeff Bezos, Amazon. Last year, he paid no tax, and he got something like a $129 million refund. I'm not making that up. You can go and look it up. I may have undercut that number that he got a tax refund for in 2019. So there's no reason at all to be voting for him. Unless you are a racist or you are a misogynist or you are both, and you would be both. There is no reason to vote for him. And as that report you just heard from Chris Hayes, that excerpt from what he was saying on his show yesterday on the 7th of September indicates, is that the economy is not working for the average person. It's not working for you. It's working for that top 1%, top 5% of people in the country. That's the very rich, the wealthy, the market movers that I talked about. So there's no reason to be voting for this guy. The economy is a lot more dire than Donald Trump would have you believe. And since this is now voting season, this is election season, and we've got exactly 56 more days of voting to go before we get to the end of that period on November 3rd, it is important to start going through these issues one by one. And I will be doing a lot more of that here as we get day by day toward October, quite frankly. And let's deal with these issues because this is very important. The economy is probably one of the top 2 or 3 most important issues for the country. I don't think there's any question about that. Now, I can certainly ask you, and I will, what you think the most important issue is in your life in terms of where this election is? What's your most important issue? What's the issue that matters the most to you? Is it healthcare? Is it the coronavirus, which dovetails with healthcare? But those are separate entities, though, when you think about it. Is it education? Is it criminal justice reform? Is it police brutality? Is it the environment and climate? What is and there are many other, a woman's right to choose, to have autonomy over her own body and not have the state interfere with that and intrude upon it. Education, there's a million things, right? And my question to you is, what is the most important, the issue of racism in the country and whiteness, the systemic whiteness that happens in this country that's a part of the fabric of this country? What is the most important issue to you? Certainly the economy is among those, because the economy affects the general health of this country and the ability of the government, quite frankly, to respond to what is going on in the country about the financial priorities. What are the financial priorities of a government? Usually, some of that may take its cue from what the economy is doing. Joe Biden has made it clear that he wants to stimulate the economy and reinvigorate the job market and investment into new technologies. I read about this and shared that with you last week, or over the last couple of days at least, in one of his plans. So it's very important that you do look at some of these plans, and I will be putting links up to these plans. I know it's a lot of reading because it's in-depth, and most people do not have the time to read that much of the material, and it's densely written in some cases, so most people won't read it. But I know some people will read it, and hopefully you will be one of those individuals who does. So this is really what the story is about the economy, and it's about what the priorities are. Donald Trump has chosen not to prioritize responding to the issues of economic despair. What he does is say, kids, you have to go back to school. Everybody has to rush back and go back and buy things, when they can't do that if they are sick or if they are afraid of catching coronavirus, which this guy, Donald Trump, has chosen, of course, not to respond to or deal with. He is now pretending and actively saying, that this virus is done with. We've turned the corner. We're turning the corner. Oh, really? Is it convenient to how convenient is it? 7 weeks, 8 weeks, 8 weeks from the election. Oh, we're turning the corner. Everything that Donald Trump is doing is all about looking at the election. That's all he cares about. Even though I would say to you, he doesn't even care about winning. He cares more about destroying and staying in power. This is a very, very obvious thing, at least to me. I don't know about you, but that's the way it looks in my eyes. And I think it's pretty darn unmistakable. This notion that somehow Donald Trump has this idea of wanting to turn the corner on a virus that has taken the lives of almost 191,000 people as I speak in this country, the United States of America, is absolutely laughable and insulting. 191,000 people have died on his watch, on Donald Trump's watch. This is Donald Trump's America. And it is not an America that is safe, and it is not an America that is positive. It's an America that is dying. And his slogan, "Make America Great Again," is "Make America Dead."
My main concern with what is happening right now is the police brutality that is running rampant through our country, and there needs to be a change to fix that, but right now it almost seems to be being encouraged. And that's very worrisome for me because I'm worried we're on the verge of a civil war. A president can hold people accountable for police brutality. It has become such a big issue that people are saying, well, what are you going to do about it? And it can be done. First of all, you could, make it to where cops can actually be punished for their crimes. You can make laws to protect the people that are being brutalized. You can get rid of weapons altogether. You can make rules that say, do not discharge your weapon unless you are being fired at by the person you are trying to arrest. Right now, it's shoot first and ask questions later. And that's just not good for the citizens because it creates an environment based on fear instead of respect. And you cannot ask someone to treat you as an authority figure when death is the consequence.
That was Maddie. And Maddie, Maddie, was a participant there in an ad campaign for a super PAC that is led by the Latinx community, members of that community, an anti-Trump super PAC that is targeting multicultural, younger voters, diverse voters, Latinx voters, black voters, and younger voters, which is something I have called for on Twitter at the Popcorn REEL from Joe Biden himself and his campaign. I have wanted them to reach out more to the Latinx community, and I've wanted them to reach out to younger voters. And I have called upon Joe Biden and his campaign to hire Chuck Rocha, last name Rocha. And he's on Twitter at Chuck Rocha, by the way. He is a strategist who helped Bernie Sanders immensely in Nevada in the primaries earlier this year to turn out the Latinx vote. And Bernie won that vote overwhelmingly. Chuck Rocha has been doing this for years, and he knows his people, as it were, as I say. He knows them well. He knows his people, and he has proven it in campaigns past, and he proved it again this year when he was the strategist really behind getting the Latinx community to support Bernie. And it worked. Joe Biden so far has not chosen this route. And Ben Jealous, the head of the Project for the American Way, has said that Trump is outspending Joe Biden 10-1 in Latinx markets for their media. 10-1. Well, there are some people who are taking it upon themselves and affirmatively leading and not waiting for the Biden campaign to do this. Since the Biden campaign at the moment seems to be much more interested in doing other things. And they've had a route. Look, I'm not smashing the Biden campaign here. The Biden campaign has been good so far. It's been good and it's been solid. But what it needs to do, especially after what I would call a debacle of virtually ignoring so many Latinx people, not even virtually, they did not showcase a lot of Latinx individuals, and they should have. Now, they had the one young woman who had her father unfortunately pass away from coronavirus in Arizona, who was a Trump supporter, by the way. And they showcased her and one or two others, but generally speaking, the Democratic National Convention last month did not really showcase youth. I didn't think that was a thing that the Democratic Party did wisely. They should not have sidelined the youth for the most part, and the convention should not have ignored people like Ilhan Omar and just give, quite frankly, short shrift to AOC. They didn't even invite AOC. That was Bernie Sanders who invited AOC to speak for the, 73 seconds that she spoke for? The DNC gave her 1 minute to speak, and of course, I felt that AOC was not going to stick to 60 seconds, and she spoke for around 75 to 80 seconds. And the DNC never even invited her. She's the most galvanizing voice in American politics right now is AOC. AOC is the most, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She is the representative in Congress who represents parts of Queens and the Bronx. And she is running, of course, for re-election in November. And in New York, in those particular districts, you know what to do. Make sure that she continues on in Congress. I have no doubt that she will. But how does the Democratic Party sideline a voice like that? Didn't even invite her to the convention. So a group called It's Time for 46 has channeled its energy. They are the anti-Trump super PAC that is targeting Latinx voters, black voters, and younger voters. They've taken it upon themselves, and they can be found at It's Time for, and then the number 46. So it's itstimefor46.org. That's how you can find them. And they have started to do ads, and they're going to be doing outdoor ads and campaigns. As Suzanne Gamboa writes at NBCnews.com, the headline from September 8th, 2020, that's today, a Hispanic-led anti-Trump super PAC targets multicultural younger voters. That's the headline. And she goes into this, and I'm going to read a bit of this right now because I think it's important. And she writes, a Hispanic-led group of political and creative professionals on Tuesday launched a progressive super PAC to fund a campaign that envisions a 46th president who isn't Trump and targets multicultural millennials and Generation Z youth. Named It's Time for 46, their committee plans a digital and outdoor campaign that portrays the election as one that cancels out the 45th president, Trump, and looks forward to a new, different president with its theme, It's Time for 46, or in Spanish, Es la hora del 46. The next president will be the 46th president elected in the United States. It certainly will be if it's Joe Biden. And I think it will be Joe Biden. Because if Donald Trump were to steal this election, he would still remain as the 45th. So the 46th will be Joe Biden if people go out and vote right now, which is what you should be doing. So apparently they're going to be spending, this group, It's Time for 46, at least the goal is at least $1.5 million in digital space and outdoors with billboards and things. Now look, that's a small amount of money right now. They're going to continue to fundraise. I mean, they're certainly not going to just stick with, I'm sure they're not, well, I would imagine they're not going to stick with 1.5 million. I'm going to skip here and go to this portion of the article. Juan Proano, who is a co-founder of Plus 3, it's a company that uses technology to assist nonprofits. And he's also someone who is a veteran of several Democratic presidential and other campaigns. And he's a resident of Miami. And the article says here that he has said that he has grown worried that in his own neighborhood, he sees Trump signs across the street and at other nearby homes, but no Joe Biden signs, and that on a recent trip by car from Miami in Florida to Austin, Texas, he saw many Trump signs, but few Biden signs. Quote, "We are not willing to sit aside and take for granted that they have it in the bag, that they've covered the bases," end quote, said Proano, referring to the Biden campaign. In a Bext Disson, and I'm loath to mention this, but I'm going to mention it. Because I've always told you that you should ignore polls. And this is a poll of people in Miami-Dade County, which is this is a a county that is heavily Latinx. Now, they say that Suzanne Gamboa says that Biden, and this is according to this poll from Ben Dixon and Amandi, of those Miami-Dade voters in Florida, in this key state, Biden tops Trump 55-38 in that county. But, she adds, the Latino vote is neck and neck, with Trump leading by 1 point, according to the Miami Herald. And that's where I have been telling Joe Biden and his campaign on Twitter, over and over again I've tweeted them, you have to spend money in the Latinx community and you have to reach out to them. You cannot have Donald Trump outspending you 10-1 in Latinx media markets. That is, I'm sorry, that can't happen. They are the second or third biggest voting bloc in this country. And you are sending a really poor message to the Latinx community if you are the Biden campaign and you are not doing anything at all to really get them into the fold for you. Donald Trump is the one that has called Latinx people, Mexican people, rapists, drug dealers, committing crime, and all of that. He said all of that in 2015. He has not changed his stance. Donald Trump is the one who separated by force thousands upon thousands upon thousands of families, kids from their parents. These are all Latinx people, Mexican people, other brown people. He has separated their families. Kids never ever seeing their parents again. 10,000 families or more, much more. Families found dead in the Rio Grande. Fathers and daughters lying face down in the Rio Grande. And yet, the Latino vote in Miami-Dade County has Trump leading by 1 point, according to the Miami Herald. Joe Biden, you will have to do more. And this campaign must do more. I've alluded to it before, but I'm going to be more clear about it right now. And I've definitely done this on Twitter at the Popcorn REEL. I have repeatedly tweeted Joe Biden and his campaign. And I've also CC'd Chuck Rocha. And his name's going to come up here in a moment. But Joe Biden's campaign has to start getting serious about courting the Latinx vote. Because it's really not enough to just rely upon the fact, as Valerie Jarrett did a few weeks ago, oh, well, I'm confident that when the election comes, the Latino community will support him. That is the worst message to send. Because what you are doing is taking the Latino, or as I say, the Latinx community for granted. It is a terrible thing to do. And the Democratic Party has done this for years with black voters and Latinx voters. Which is why I think a super PAC like this one, called It's Time for 46, recognizes that it is time for others to take control of the messaging and targeting of black and brown people and young people. Because if the youth vote stays at home, it hurts Joe Biden and it helps Donald Trump. It really does. So the Democratic Party must not be so cavalier about the situation with a huge voting bloc. It just cannot be so cavalier or reckless. And it's, quite frankly, I would say criminal. Honestly, I would say it's criminal for a political campaign to do this. Honestly, I just think that is sending a very, very, very bad message. And it's a message that does not fill me with any real satisfaction or happiness. Now, look, again, I think the Biden campaign has been run well, but the areas where I don't think it has been run well at all is in this area, and certainly not in the area of procuring the youth vote. Now, there are some places like the Sunrise Movement, that is the environmental group, the young people and progressives, who I think have been excellent. And they are one of several, but they are out front. And they endorsed Joe Biden a few months ago because they saw that he listened to them and made some promises to them that I think is encouraging. But I think he's got to start, and he might well be that I just haven't seen it here in California, but he may well be doing ads targeted to the youth, but he should start doing that and put them nationally, front and center. I get it. That campaign is spending in certain states. So here in California, we're not necessarily going to see that. I'm going to get to this other part now of the article by Suzanne Gamboa. Chuck Roker, former senior advisor to Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign, of course I just mentioned him a few moments ago, launched Nuestro PAC to boost turnout of Latino voters. Former Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa and entrepreneur and media personality Fernando Espuelas launched American Latinos United to engage Latino voters in swing states. The Latino-focused PACs, quote, are doing really wonderful work. I think they also need to be supported fully, end quote, said Proano, adding that he's seeking to broaden the effort. Quote, this is going to require significantly more effort, and our community cuts across so many ethnicities and races, end quote. As an example, he said that his 3 children are Latino and his nephews are Afro-Latino. The campaign won't wade into the weeds on policy or focus on Biden, but will have a definite Democratic or liberal bent. Their campaign highlights other numbers such as the more than 185,000 people to date killed by COVID-19 under Trump's watch. Of course, I mentioned it's now over 190,000. The estimated 26 million people who have protested police violence, the 5.2 million women who have participated in women's marches, and the more than 5,500 children separated at the border. And like I just said, I think it's more than that. It's closer to 10,000. Unless, look, correct me if I'm wrong. And this is the thing. Of these 190,000 people plus who have been killed in this country due to coronavirus and Donald Trump not acting to do anything, the largest percentage of those is the Latinx community. Disproportionately, the largest disproportionate number of the people dying are in the Latinx community and the Black community in this country. And yet, in at least one county, it's just one county, which is why, again, I despise polls. In one county in Florida, Miami-Dade, according to the Miami Herald, you still have Donald Trump leading by 1 point over Biden in the Latinx vote for that community. That's just staggering. Which tells me one of two things. One, the Latinx community who's answered this question probably do not watch the news media that maybe you watch. And you may watch Fox, but they certainly do watch Fox. That's what I would suggest. Perhaps that in that county, some of the individuals who respond to that poll are people who may have ties to Cuba. And of course, they are anti-Castro. And of course, many of those voters have traditionally voted Republican. And that maybe also they are getting disinformation from right-wing places like Fox or by conservative hate radio. I mean, what accounts for that? What accounts for a group that has been so heavily targeted by Donald Trump over the years to still have these astonishing supports for him? Ben Jealous talked about this in a clip I played a week or two ago, an audio clip, where he said that the Latinx community at the moment is between 30 and 40%, closer to 40% in support of Donald Trump right now. After everything. How is that even possible? So this is why Joe Biden, and when Proano, and I forget his first name, says that in this article by Suzanne Gamboa that these Latino-focused PACs, quote, I think they also need to be supported fully. He's talking to Joe Biden. That is a reference to Joe Biden's campaign. Support these PACs. And also a reference to everyone else. Donate to these PACs. We're going to need everybody to win this election. If Joe Biden wants to put his hand on the Bible on January the 20th, he is going to need everybody. And the lesson of 2016 and of other previous Democratic campaigns for president is that you need everybody. And that means you cater and spend money and visit everybody in your base. Shore up your base. Do not chase around for these mythical white Republican voters. That's the lesson that Hillary Clinton did not grasp, but she learned it painfully in the end. That her campaign strategists did some things that hurt her so much more than even the Russians did. And that is refusing to campaign in Wisconsin during the general election. She went during the primary. There was even a debate in Wisconsin during the primary. But Hillary Clinton, strangely enough, because her strategists thought it was a darn good idea, never appeared in Wisconsin during the general election. And she lost Wisconsin in, less than 70,000 votes? 20,000 votes? The lesson here for Joe Biden is to leave no stone unturned. And you know what's interesting? Is that as Donald Trump disrespects the military in this country, there are 13 Latinx soldiers who have been killed at Fort Hood in Texas. 13. This year alone. 13. And the news media has been virtually silent. Joe Biden's not talked about this. Nobody's talked about it. The only individuals who have talked about it that I've heard are Amy Goodman. She's really the only one. From Democracy Now! If you are fed up of news media, by the way, that does not cover stories that you want to hear, then you want to turn to progressive news media like democracynow.org, where you will get stories like what has happened and what is going on in the case of Vanessa Guillen, the U.S. military private who was savagely murdered earlier this year. One of 13 Latinx military personnel at the Army base of Fort Hood in Texas to have been killed this year alone on or around that military base. Joe Biden's campaign must get busy targeting and meeting with one of the largest voting blocs in the country. Not just the surrogates. And I get it. Yes, there's an issue with Biden because he was attached to Obama, and Obama deported more people without documentation than any other president ever. But this is the time now for Joe Biden to start to talk to the Latinx community and to listen to them. We are exactly 8 weeks away from the end of voting season in this country. And it's time for Joe Biden's campaign to grow some ears and listen to the Latinx community.
One of the things that I remember in 2016 are folks who voted third party or didn't vote at all and argued their point of this was best for them. Well, we're in a space now that we can't just think about ourselves. We have to think about everyone. And I just cannot imagine, or do I want to imagine, a reality of 4 more years of 45. And we have to do our part to step up, to show up. What I would want from the next president is someone who has a clear vision, a so clear vision than what we've been dealing with the last 4 years.
We cannot afford to be selfish. And that was Simone. Simone is part of the ad campaign for the super PAC that I was just talking about, the anti-Trump super PAC, entitled It's Time for 46. They can be found at It's Time For and the number 46. It's Time For 46.org. You will see some videos from their campaign, which they've just started. They just began this Latinx-led anti-Trump super PAC today. And by the way, for the record, I hate the term Hispanic. And I know that that's why I always ask people in the Latinx community how you prefer to be called, because there are many different layers to the Latinx community. And some people in the community don't mind being called Hispanic. And then there's a lot of other people who object to that, who are Latinx. And I do too, and I'm a black man. And I think that term Hispanic is awful. I think it's racist. And I know some Latinx people who would agree with me. So there's that. But who you just heard from there was Simone. And you have to watch these ads. You just heard that one. And she talks about that, this selfishness. And that's what happened in 2016 with some people. And it was largely these white voters who were privileged, and no matter how much money they made, they felt, well, I'm not happy with Trump. Obviously, I don't want him. But Hillary Clinton? Ooh, I don't want her. She's this and she's that and then she's the other. I'm going to vote for a third party. And I know people personally who did this. And I begged them, please don't write in someone's name or vote for a third party. And they didn't listen to me. And they voted for a third party who had no chance of winning a darn thing. They threw away their vote. They totally threw away their vote. And it was a point of personal pride. I'm going to vote this way, and I'm going to stick it to the system. You're not sticking it to the system. You are actually reaffirming the system if you're voting third party. What you want to do is vote within the parameters of the system, and yes, that's reaffirming it too. However, you vote towards strategy, not just towards your own personal pride and privilege. As Simone said, this is about the country, not just about you, but what the country is doing and how it's faring. Of course you're going to vote because there's something personal that you have invested in it. But you have to also go beyond that. Go beyond that and vote for the well-being of the entire country, not just yourself. And too many people in 2016 decided to vote for themselves by either writing in a candidate, voting for a third party they knew wouldn't win, or they stayed at home. Many black voters stayed at home. Many voters, period, stayed at home, no matter what their race was. But many black people stayed at home. There was a significant drop-off. And there are reasons for that, including the fact that Hillary Clinton, for some, is a problematic figure. But you can't throw away this participation in the democracy, because the democracy only exists as far as the people who actually participate in that democracy, in quotes. And I've said this before. The democracy is only as strong as the people who participate in it. So if 100 million people are sitting it out, that is not good news. And this idea of, well, my state's going to vote for her anyway, so I just can sit back and afford to write someone's name in because it's a point of pride for me personally, to show my dissatisfaction with the system. Hey, you got people talking like that now, trolls on Twitter and people who claim that they're these supporters of freedom and socialism and Bernie and all of this. I'm a Bernie Sanders supporter, but I've got a bit of common sense. You vote to strategize so that when you vote a Joe Biden in, you continue to push him. There are groups doing this now who get it. They'll give him his vote, but they're continuing to push him. And then if he gets in, and when he gets in, because I think he will, then you continue to push him. This is not a few weeks struggle. This is an ongoing struggle that goes on, not just up till these 56 days remaining of voting. It goes beyond that. It goes on November 4th, 5th, January 10th, 21st, when he walks in, and beyond. And that's the lesson that I think people have to be able to learn and understand. What engaging in democracy is, it's not only and not just voting. It is the continuous process of lobbying and protesting and writing your congresspeople and running yourself for office. And challenging and holding the people that you vote for accountable. You don't just turn off the gas and go home. Hey, my guy got in. Hey, my lady got in. I can just go home now. No. That was the lesson that people didn't learn with Obama. We voted him in twice, and very few of us put demands on him at all. We were enthralled. We were excited The first black man. But very few of us, if we're really being honest, very few of us, except for Code Pink and a few other groups, very few of us put any demands on him at all. Didn't demonstrate, didn't protest, didn't ask him anything. We didn't ask anything of him once he got in. And in his second term, we didn't do a thing. And that led to Hillary Clinton. And then not only did we not do anything, many of us stayed home. That cannot be the way. That cannot be the way now for these next 56 days of voting. That cannot be the way no matter what happens in this election. And it cannot be the way beyond that time. We have to be awake. And I think that 2020 as a year has awakened us all. And not just awakened us, but awakened us into action. That must be the way forward. Action.
We voted by mail during a civil war, a world war, and a global pandemic. Another world war. And now, another global pandemic. No matter what this country faces, we always find a way to vote.
That was a CNN ad for voting, and I totally agree with it. We have voted through all kinds of things. And why stop now? Donald Trump is destroying the country, and of course, as I said, he's interested in destroying more than he is even winning. Destroying the military and calling names of people who are bravely serving and dying. Attacking his generals and military personnel that he's got around him. I mean, does this guy sound like a guy who's interested in winning an election? He wants to totally destroy the country. He is totally destroying the country. And if you want to add to destroying the country, then you know who to vote for. But if you want to rebuild a country and demand justice for it, and for the people who are affected, i.e. Breonna Taylor, whose murderers still have not been arrested, or for Daniel Prude, or for George Floyd, or for Rayshard Brooks, or for Jacob Blake Jr., who is now up in bed making videos. Good for him. He's a fighter. So let's be fighters as well. Let's vote and make sure you vote early. Next, a surprise segment.
Shannon Foley Martinez is, and I hope you're sitting down for this, an ex-neo-Nazi and a current Yale professor who specifically works to de-radicalize people who've fallen victim to online radicalization. Shannon, thank you for joining us on the show. Ben, kick us off.
So, Shannon, first of all, thanks for coming. And second of all, look, we talked a few weeks ago for a story about QAnon. And,
yes.
You told me explicitly, I don't know what I was thinking when I was going down that white supremacist rabbit hole. Was it like, did I lose empathy? What was happening at that time? And what you were saying is, at that point, you didn't think you were becoming a bad guy. And that's really what's happening with these QAnon people, right? They don't think they're becoming a bad guy. They think they're becoming a hero in their own story, right?
Sure. I'm not a Yale professor. I'm a consultant at Peril at American University, just to clear that out.
So you're accusing me of disinformation already. I'm 30 minutes into the show, and I've already provided disinformation. Don't clip that and put that on the internet. Okay, go ahead, Shannon.
Everybody already thinks that anyway. So one of the things that I didn't recognize while I was radicalizing into what I was doing was that I was creating an echo chamber for myself. In my case, it was a physical echo chamber. I ended up only spending time with people who believed what I believed, only in spaces where this was all that was going on. And I didn't recognize that was happening to me, that my brain was really like hijacked into only framing the world around this ideology and these beliefs that I was immersing myself in. One of the things that's very important is that these are still individual stories. It's important for us to talk about the meta, right? It's important for us to talk about this bigger, larger QAnon thing. But the people who are part of this are still individual human beings who all have a story behind how they got there. Most of the time, these stories involve some kind of trauma or layers of trauma in their lives. We know specifically when we're talking about women and moms from the Me Too movement, just how endemic sexual assault and sexual violence is for women in the country. That the world feels dangerous and out of control to these people, and that they're looking for something that had a meaningful connection to something greater than themselves that they haven't found elsewhere. When we start interjecting the idea that children are in danger, of course, moms in particular and women are like, oh, we have to save the children. Like, why has no one told me about this? And so then when they hear and they start investigating and interacting with these ideas, that there's this coming from this sense of deep disempowerment, that when you feel like you have found the true truth, the real facts which hitherto have been hidden from you, that is very alluring and seductive and feels a lot like empowerment for a lot of people. The QAnon folks tend to be older people, as opposed to a lot of the further right-wing stuff and esoteric Hitlerism stuff tends to be younger teenagers and young adults. But this is often middle-aged and older people who feel like they're tech savvy, but aren't actually really all that tech savvy. So their ability to fact check is often really limited, and they think they are. So one of the things, I also work like helping people leave, radical violence-based stuff. And one of the things that I have found is that when you're talking to people who are involved in conspiracy theories, that the problem is that there really are conspiracies. Like, part of the explosion of QAnon is that it is being exploited by domestic and foreign influences to create and sow discord. But there isn't a single conspiracy, right? There isn't one driver. There are lots of people who have power, who want to maintain and amplify their power, and there are conspiracies that are going on. But there isn't one singular conspiracy. So how to talk about that in a complex way and how to interject that complexity into what they have, this worldview that they have created, to navigate the difficulty of feeling this world that feels dangerous and unsafe, and that they're losing security that they once had through multitudinous drivers. So there's like personal things, and then there's everything going on in the world. There's recession, there's, social change. There's, that we're watching the dismantlement, hopefully, of white supremacy. We're watching violence from far right actors, and so the world does feel dangerous and unpredictable to a lot of people. And so this gives an explanation to why.
It's a useful explanation, Shannon, because while it's hard to empathize, it is useful to understand that the drivers are similar: fear, danger, and being out of control. Thank you for sharing that with us. Shannon Foley-Martinez is a reformed white supremacist who now works to keep people from going down into those conspiracy theories and into those hate groups.
That was the surprise segment on this edition of The Politicrat. That was from MSNBC Velshi. Velshi is Ali Velshi, and his show Velshi on Sunday, September 6th of this year. He had on Shannon Foley-Martinez. who, as you heard, was a former member of, well, she was a former white racist, a white supremacist, as it's called. I don't really like that term. I've told you why. When it comes to, because there's nothing supreme about the people who do what they do when they're talking about hating and killing people. But she was, in fact, Ms. Foley Martinez was, in fact, someone who was a part of that movement, that group, and was violent in that group. And you heard her there talking about this QAnon thing, which has become, and I hate to talk about them too, because it's like you give them more publicity. But if you are wanting to deal with and address this terroristic threat, and it is a terrorist group, I mean, the FBI has recognized it as such. One of the greatest dangers to America is this group and is white terrorism. In fact, the FBI has said that, and the Department of Homeland Security has said that. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.